Yo, what up, a-holes? Thank you for tuning into the Holistic A-Hole podcast. My name is Eric Levi, and I'm the Holistic A-Hole. I hope you're doing good wherever you're listening to this. I'm doing great. It's springtime, New York City, and it's just the best. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I hope you're having a great day. And if you're not having a great day, I hope this podcast helps bring your day up from subpar to par, to above par, to birdie, eagle, and let's go with hole in one. Why the heck not? I hope you're doing great because today what I want to talk about is some crazy shit that I saw on Netflix, which for the last month, apparently, everybody's been talking about, and that is the documentary Wild Wild Country. And just a little forewarning, if you haven't seen the documentary yet, there's going to be a few spoilers in this. I don't really know how much I'm going to spoil it, but it is a historical documentary. So if I spoil something for you, you know, the information is all been out there in public knowledge for about 30 years now. So blame Google or blame yourself for not taking the initiative to get on this and learn about what this documentary is about, which is this, what they call a cult out of Oregon, Rajneeshpuram. And we're going to talk all about that because some a-holes out there in podcast land brought this to my attention. And, I'd seen it being talked about on social media, the old Facebook, old Twitter, Instagram. People are talking about this documentary. And I thought it was just another stupid Netflix show. And then I started watching it, and I was like, holy cow, how did I not know about any of this? So today we're going to talk about that and just kind of give my thoughts on it because it does pertain to what I like to get into here on the podcast. But before we do, I want to say what's up to all the new listeners. Even if you're not a new listener, thanks for returning. You returning means the world to me. And if you haven't done this yet, whether you're new or returning, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Hit the subscribe button right there in your podcast feed, wherever you're listening to this, Apple iTunes, Podcast Player, Stitcher, CastBox, all those platforms. Hit the subscribe button so you get this podcast fresh out the box when it comes out twice a week, every single week into perpetuity. And then go over and subscribe to the YouTube channel, Holistic A-Hole. Find me on all the socials, Holistic A-Hole on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Friendster, MySpace, whatever you're doing, whatever you're dealing with, whatever you're shucking out there to the world, make sure you connect with the Holistic A-Hole. And also, let me give a little note about this episode specifically. As much as I wanted to just spend hours and hours and hours digging into all the information on this podcast, I just don't have the time, dude. This topic to me is so interesting, and really I'm kind of living it every single day. But with this commune specifically and what happened pertaining to the documentary, there's so much information out there. It runs so deep that I just don't have the time to read all the stuff. But if there's something I miss on this podcast that you know that I don't, if there's information that is interesting to you that I don't cover on here, please send me a tweet, send me an Instagram message, send me something on Facebook, or just email me, holistic.a.hole@gmail.com, and fill me on what I miss. And whatever I miss in this podcast, maybe I'll do another one a couple weeks from now and just kind of fill in the blanks when I have some more time to kind of just collect my thoughts. Because really what I'm going off of is just, what basically my thoughts on the documentary as I was watching it. I finished it a day or two ago, so I'm just kind of going fresh off memory, and it's most likely I'm going to leave a lot of stuff out. So again, if you're a fan of this documentary, Wild Wild Country, and I miss anything on this podcast, shoot me a message on the old socials, email, whatever it is. Let me know, because this well runs real deep. So you must be sitting there thinking, all right, dude, get into it already. Boom. Here we go. I want to talk about this documentary, Wild Wild Country, on Netflix. And what this documentary is, it's a 6-part documentary about this commune in the 1980s called Rajneeshpuram. It was in Oregon. This is where this all took place. This little, I guess it's a town or city or called Anthem. And basically what it was a, I guess like a city, you know? They call it a commune. It was a commune. It was a community of people who rallied around this religious leader named, his religious name was Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. That wasn't his real name. He had an actual real name. This was like his spiritual name. Later, when he got older and eventually died, he changed his name to Osho. And really, if you go to a bookstore, depending on where you are, I mean, there's there's books and books. I don't know how many books. I feel like it's in the hundreds, maybe. I could be wrong, maybe 30 or 50, but there's a lot of books written on this one guy's teachings. And basically what he was a guru. He was a guru who came up in India in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. He was a philosophy teacher and then eventually moved into the spiritual world, and he would give these talks and hold these, I guess they were, sessions and, meditations, and amassed followers. And he built himself an ashram, or pretty much, like a tribe. And over the years, before he even moved this thing to America, I read there was over like 30,000 people came to this ashram over the years. So, he's attracting thousands and thousands of people. That number is pretty big for one guy to amass in followership. And there was a lot of, it wasn't just like, losers or confused idiots or, gullible morons. It was like highly educated people. This is, I think, the confusion, and this is my main, oh, Christ. Hold on a second. Sorry, a-hole. Somebody's at the door. Had to let him in. Business as usual here in Holistic A-hole Studios. But part of the misunderstanding here of this world of meditation is that I think people who aren't in on this look at people who are meditators and yogis and and they look at them like they're weird. Maybe not so much anymore. Maybe like in the last 10 years, that stereotype has kind of been broken as more and more people turn to meditation, and I preach meditation, and plenty of successful people preach meditation. I feel like there's not a podcast or like a business or personal development podcast or talk I listen to that does not involve meditation discussion in some, in some realm. So it wasn't like he was attracting dummies. There was people who supported this message, and from what I gather between the documentary and the limited research I've done online, is that Bhagwan's teachings were spiritual. They had, like Buddhist leanings, self-discovery leanings, quieting the mind, typical, kind of like new age meditation ideas. But where he differed was in his thoughts of materialism, in capitalism. A lot of these teachings, very rarely will you hear a spiritual teacher tell you that you should say fuck it and go make money. You know, you should go get yourself a nice car, or you should have as much sex as possible, or you should, fucking burn people to make more money, This is where his teachings kind of got into like his own thing. And I really think this is what people connected to, especially people in the West, people in America, no doubt connected to this spiritual teaching that told them that you are not a bad person if you want to make more money. In fact, you can use spirituality to make more money. And I've talked about it on this podcast too. I believe money is spiritual. Plenty of people believe money is spiritual. This is a big thing a guy like Tony Robbins talks about. Tony Robbins always says, man, money is spiritual. The more spiritual you are, the more you can attract money. It is the law of attraction, This is like the thing that, again, a movie like The Secret got hammered on, It's so corny, if you just put in your mind that you're going to make $1 million, you'll make $1 million. You'll go out to your mailbox and and you'll see a check for $1 million out there. Granted, I think that's crazy, but the law of attraction is a law. It's not the theory of attraction. It's not the idea of attraction. It's not the concept of attraction. It's not the thought of attraction. It's the law of attraction, meaning that when you desire something, if you put the right mechanisms in place, you will attract the thing you want. And by mechanisms, I basically mean your subconscious mind. I'm not talking about, like tanks and force and, mafia and how do I rob somebody and get $1 million. No, if you truly desire $1 million and you put it in your subconscious to obtain $1 million, you're going to obtain $1 million somehow, some way, if your devotion is strong enough. Any millionaire will tell you that's how they did it. Unless they're Eric Trump or Donald Trump Jr. and they just happen to have a rich dad and they had $1 million. Self-made millionaires are people who saw in their mind at some point, I'm going to make a shit ton of money. This is how I'm going to do it. And then they went out and did it. Simple as that, It's simple as that, but it's also way more complicated than that. But this is the stuff that Bhagwan taught, and at the time, this was totally unheard of. But it attracted a lot of people who believed in this, Another thing that he preached was free sex, or sex without all the negative stigma attached to it. That pretty much comes through religion, right? What is sex, really? What is sex anymore? If you just look at it as a strictly biological function, then sex is the thing we do to create life, And when you start really digging into the biology of sex, or the evolution of sex, sex is awesome. Sex is awesome because the quote-unquote creator, okay, sorry about that little technical hiccup. But yeah, no, sex is awesome. And it was, given us through evolution, through probably millions and billions of years, and every species probably experiences the same thing, that procreating is amazing, having sex is great, right? If sex was the equivalent of a chore, of something that you had to do, like if it was, like washing your dishes, cleaning your dishes, then who the fuck would have sex? Single guys wouldn't have sex. I know, because when I was a single dude living in an apartment with like 3 or 4 roommates, none of us did our fucking dishes. We'd be sitting there with piles and stacks of dishes in our sink because we were all single dudes, and the last thing we wanted to do was fucking clean and do dishes, okay? If sex was the equivalent of that, humanity would not have survived. There would be no humans. We would just, be deer and mountains and frogs, and there'd be no humans. But instead, sex is fucking awesome. And so this guy Bhagwan goes off and he's like, look, man, sex is great. We shouldn't we shouldn't put sex in this bucket of being evil. Lust should not be, one of the, is it the 7 deadly sins, make you feel bad for wanting to have sex. Religion is just here to make you feel bad for wanting to do a thing that your body does nothing but tell you that this is what you should be doing. Your body is like, dude, you should be out having sex, okay? Now, granted, there are limitations. This is, I think, one of the most important parts of civilization is that, we put rules on controlling the kinds of sex and the conditions of sex that are acceptable. You can't just grab someone by the hair and force them to have sex with you. You can't just slap someone around and get mad when they don't have sex with you. You can't just hold a gun to someone. This is all examples of rape, which in our society we don't like. Okay, unless you're in Hollywood. Hey now. So the Bhagwan's teachings, granted, a little alternative compared to typical, Eastern meditation, yogi traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, a little kind of left-leaning, as some would say, compared to Bhagwan or compared to the norm, but still, I really believe, as far as humanity goes, has its place. So this is where things start to really change when Bhagwan has this message of being like, look, go get as much money as you can, go have as much sex as you can, and while you're there, learn to live in this state of peace and happiness and joy and laughter. I mean, who doesn't want that, right? To me, that is beautiful. That is beautiful. But really, we're all just human. And so are the people, the people who lived in Rajneeshpuram. So where does Rajneeshpuram come into play? So basically what happens is at some point, the Bhagwan gets it in his head that he wants to move his operation to America, okay? And, the documentary goes into all this, to the procedure, he had a secretary girl who he liked and was, doing all the administrative heavy lifting, basically taking care of all the bullshit while Bhagwan could just be a spiritual teacher. But then at some point, I think she quit or he fired her and he took on this new lady who went by the name of Ma Anand Sheela. And this is where everything really changes, because basically what Bhagwan did is he knew Ma Anand Sheela loved him and loved his teachings, but he was like, look, we gotta have a little separation. What you need to do is you need to go live your own life and go marry a man somewhere else. So she moves to America. She marries this Jewish guy. And then there's like some stories about, hey, this Jewish guy, he was connected politically or had a lot of money, and she was pulling a lot of money out of him, but he wanted to get close to Bhagwan. This is what was happening. A lot of rich Americans were getting into Bhagwan. And this is where he made a lot of his money. And this guy was no different. Then eventually this guy passes away, and Sheela goes back to India, and then Bhagwan's like, all right, we got to go to America. So they go to America. I think they spend like a year scouting out locations, and they find this giant plot of land in Oregon and say, this is where we're going to go. Just a random fucking place in, I don't know what part of Oregon this is, the east, west, north, south. Either way, it's not Portland. It's not where there's people. It was like in the middle of nowhere. And look, as somebody who comes from, the west-ish coast, there is a lot of places like this in the west, on the west coast, in places like Oregon, Washington, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico. When you live in a place like New York City, every square inch is extremely valuable. Like a square inch in New York City probably retails at least $25,000. But when you go to the West, I mean, you could buy fucking acres and acres and acres for literally pennies on the dollar. And so they find this giant, I think it was like 60,000 acres or 16,000 acres, some crazy number. I think it was 60,000, 64,000 acres or something crazy of land. And basically what the Bhagwan did is he opened up a commune in this land. And they had hundreds or thousands of people come and pretty much not only pay in to be a part of the commune, but then pretty much sacrifice their entire lives to build a fucking city. And this is the shit to me that is most mind-blowing of anything, which is that you organized people to build a freaking city, man. Not just like, hey, they built a house or they built they built a store or they built like a yoga studio. No, these motherfuckers built a city with running water, an electricity grid, an airport, roads and freeways. And I mean, dude, they like, that's not easy to do. That's like civil engineering and, you got to have smart people, lawyers. You got to have, I mean, just think about what you need to build a city. They somehow had all that shit. And then they somehow had the money to buy all that shit. And, there's a lot of stories about where the money came from, which is what pisses me off about this documentary. One of my biggest critiques of this Netflix show was they did not tell you where the money came from. Somehow there was all this money floating around, they focus a lot of attention on how Bhagwan, had all these Rolls Royces and, mansions and money and jewelry and watches and all this stuff. But they don't talk about like, where did the money come from to build the freaking roads? Who paid that money? It just was like they just built the city. I think if you come out with a documentary in 2018, you have to be a little more cognizant of the fact that people are not stupid anymore. We don't just look for let me take that back. A lot of people are stupid, and a lot of people live off of sound bites. But when you're a holistic a-hole, you're thinking more about the whole picture. And if you're like me, you were watching that and you're like, where did they get the money to build all these buildings and build the roads and somehow dig for water and supply fucking running water and electricity into the city? Like, where'd this money come from? And it came from the people who lived there. People would go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. They would sell all the shit they owned in their lives. Some guy was saying that he sold a Porsche for $20,000, a brand new Porsche in the early 80s for $20,000. Like, that's crazy. And then they had these, there was a connection between Hollywood and these people, and the Rajneeshi, and I mean, it just gets to the point where the story is so unbelievable. I can't believe it happened only 30 years ago, and the story just gets out of control at some point. It's like, at first, it's like they build this beautiful commune and people were living in what many called paradise, and it was apparently free love, and there was, everybody had all of their basic necessities met, and on the outside, if you were looking in, if you were listening to what the people on the inside were saying, it sounded like fucking absolute paradise. But when you start being critical of what was happening on the inside, and you start scrutinizing every little thing, you start to see, man, it looked pretty fucking crazy, right? Like, in just the construction of the city of Rajneeshpuram, people were working 16-hour days because there were constructions. Like, this is another thing that blows my mind, because I see so much construction walking around New York. Everything's always under construction, and just like the life of construction workers, just sitting there, boarding stuff up, hammering, drilling, bulldozing, driving fucking tractors. Like, who taught these people how to drive tractors and drive, bulldozers and fucking work these? Granted, I'm sure it can't be that difficult to figure out, but somebody had to come in and really teach these people how to do this shit. And those people had to be like, okay, well, I'm completely done with my normal consultant job or whatever they were, and now they're fucking drilling holes and, fucking filling concrete and putting up slabs of brick. And I mean, just thinking of the day-to-day minutia of building a city to me is mind-blowing. But these people were working like sweatshop workers. I mean, plain and simple, they were working like the people who built New York City, When I take people around New York, it blows my mind every time when I tell them about the skyscrapers. I'm like, look, they built these skyscrapers in just a couple years, man. They built the Empire State Building in 15 months. Not because they were just better at construction. It's because they worked 16-hour days, 350 days a year. They got Christmas off. They got a weekend day. And other than that, they were fucking working, making no money. These people weren't making any money. The money they made, they paid right back in to the commune, So, but still these people, they were working and then they were meditating. And then even when the city was built, they still basically ran the city. You had city administrators, you had people working for the fire department, you had people working for the municipal department. I mean, the stories are mixed. Some people say it was crazy, it was out of control. They got there and they left almost immediately. And then some people were like, look, I fucking, lived there for 5-6 years. I had children there, which was another issue because the Bhagwan did not like kids. So he was telling people either you leave your kids back where you come from or, you get sterilized. But we don't want no kids here. But people had to bring their kids. So the kids that got raised in the commune, they didn't go to school. The schools they went to were just kind of about like the Bhagwan's teachings. But otherwise, these kids basically raised themselves like wolves, But again, the documentary doesn't go into a lot of this stuff. The documentary is more about the drama that you saw play out in the news, which is understandable. I'm not going to be a hard critique on that because, this documentary should have really been like, a Ken Burns, like 15-part fucking each episode 2 hours documentary to really tell the story because they miss so much stuff. It's not only that it was this crazy religious leader or this fanatical religious leader or a spiritual leader who convinced these people to build a city. It was the fact that you had humans deciding to do this with their lives, to follow somebody who didn't really give them anything. He gave them, peace of mind, I guess, but people weren't walking around with gold chains. They had a dress code. They wore yellow and orange clothing, they or maybe just orange, or was it orange and red? One of the three. I think it definitely orange, but they weren't getting like nice cars or jewelry or really living for any, they themselves weren't living for any like capitalist purposes. They were just paying into a system so a few people could be the benefactors, right? Basically the people at the top. And that brings me to the topic of why socialism will never work, why communism doesn't work, because that's what this place was. This place was communist, right? It started off spiritual, it started off about, flaunting the ideals of capitalism and making something like wanting to obtain more money or have more sex be a virtue and not a sin. All these things are great, but in order to run the commune, there had to be socialist order. Nobody could rise above anybody else. Everybody was quote unquote equal, even though they weren't equal. There are stories of these like crazy sex orgies, which a lot of the people say is not true. There was that, but it wasn't any more rampant than, if you came to New York or any other town in America, that shit happens. Of course, people are crazy, but it wasn't like the law. It wasn't like you had to have you had to have sex orgies. It was just a thing some people did, Some people had sex in the open. It wasn't like a standard city where, if you were shagging, next to a mailbox in front of a store, you would get arrested. It was like, no, that was just like, okay, some people did that shit. But not everybody did it. A small portion of people did it. People were still, for the most part, human. So, time goes on here in this, in this commune, and then things start kind of going off the rails. I mean, basically what you had was them legally buy this land, and then, they have some beef with the nearby Anthem ranchers, the people whose families have lived there for generations, and they didn't like these new folks coming in. Totally get that. Was there a little racism and prejudice involved? Most definitely. But, those people, the old schoolers, they were trying to do what they can to at least limit the influence of the Rajneeshi. And, if nothing happened, probably, if nobody tried to venture into anybody else's business, maybe everybody could have lived peacefully, and, there would have just been, time would have gone on, and maybe the commune would have burned out on itself. But this lady, Ma Anand Sheila, who was the Bhagwan secretary, was pretty much the leader of the commune. And she was like, I'm not having that shit. Not only are we going to defend ourselves, but we're going on the fucking offensive. So she loaded up the commune with fucking guns and Uzis and, fucking military grade weaponry, right? I mean, they had, bulletproof vests. They had, military gear. They trained as sharpshooters. Those people could shoot fucking lights out, apparently. Who was training them? No, they didn't even talk about where this training came from. Just somehow, they had regular ass people who, were meditators and yogis able to somehow shoot fucking fully automatic weapons and rifles. And it was crazy, So, things start going off the rails when this, Ma Anand Sheila, she's going around and she's trying to, get fucking state senators killed and poison lawmakers and, fucking, arson and theft and money issues. And it just got to the point where it was like, okay, well, the writing's on the wall. This motherfucking commune is coming down because now you're doing illegal shit. And, basically the documentary tells that story of how the commune came to grow and then how it fell. And it's pretty much like meat and potatoes, I think. A lot of people are critical of it. I think it told the story enough to where if you watch the whole documentary, it makes you want to dive in and just start Googling and fall down, these Google wormholes and these, Wikipedia wormholes, just trying to just soak up as much about this as you can because it's just so fucking out of control crazy. But my personal thoughts on this documentary are I'm not so critical in the sense that I feel like they missed too much stuff. I feel like what they did, if anything that I'm critical, is the only thing they didn't talk enough about were his spiritual teachings. Because to me, that was like they talked about it for the first maybe 15 minutes of the documentary, and then that was just that was just window dressing for all the other crazy shit that happens. Because I think to understand all the other crazy shit that happens, you have to understand what this guy Osho or the Bhagwan teaches. They made a mention of Kundalini yoga at the very beginning. Bhagwan apparently taught this thing called dynamic meditation, which apparently is like, I guess a little bit involving Kundalini yoga practices. Personally, I've done Kundalini a few times, and it's absolutely amazing. If you've never done Kundalini yoga, it can be a life changer for people, But I think what this documentary was doing was kind of positioning people who practice yoga or Kundalini yoga as being the type of people who would go for this cult. you know, almost in a way kind of demonizing the practice of meditation and yoga. This is just what I took from this. You know, if you just look at this like at a bird's eye view, granted, they didn't come out and be like, oh, these devil worshippers, they're all doing yoga. I mean, some of those town folk were saying that, and I know there's people in America who think that, and I don't think this documentary did anything to change that. I don't think this documentary did anything to be like, look, it wasn't yoga that did this to these people. It wasn't Kundalini or meditation that did this to these people. It wasn't even the people who did this to the people. It was terrible leadership. It was basically a fascist leader in the form of this lady, Ma Sheila. Yes, believe it or not, a woman can be absolutely evil. And she was, man. Bhagwan, also pretty fucking shady, you know? And I think the documentary does an okay job of highlighting that, but also kind of leaves you confused, like, whose side should you take? And as much as I think they absolutely had to interview this lady, Ma Sheila, to get this perspective of, you know, of hers, because I think, you know, the story basically revolves around her. You can't tell the story of Rajneeshpuram without talking about Ma Sheila. So I think it's interesting they talk to her, but at the same time, they kind of put this bitch on a platform. They kind of are like, look, like, all she was trying to do was just, you know, be a successful, you know, leader and grow the commune and be faithful to the teachings of Bhagwan and how she loved Bhagwan and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. You also try to murder people. You also planned on murdering innocent people. You were also threatening the livelihood of an entire commune of people and people who wanted nothing to do with you. You threatened people, you militarized people, you gave people guns with the objective of shooting at fucking federal agents, at shooting at American military personnel. You can't do that, dude. Even if you think America's fucked up, you can't just be like, hey man, it's okay to just shoot American law enforcement. You can't do that. And that's what this bitch was preaching. I mean, you know, if you ever want to just see evil speaking, I mean, this lady was pretty much pure evil. And now she takes care of old people in a retirement home in like Germany or something, you know, and basically like a hospice, end of life care, which is unbelievable, you know? And then the Bhagwan, like, you know, as pure as his teachings may have been, the motherfucker was just like drugged out. He was strung out on Valium for years. You know, he saw the approval. Oh, this was the other thing they had there. They had a lab that was making all of these different chemicals and poisoning people. They were putting these chemicals in the water that people were drinking or people suspect. They were only allowed 2 beers a day, and you know, so sometimes I would put these chemicals in the beers. And was it mind control? Was it sterilization? It was they just had all these chemicals. They poisoned an entire town with salmonella. I think it was Dallas, I think is the name of it, Dallas County or something like that. And there was like who's the Nazi doctor or whatever who ran the whole like Nazi medical program. I mean, they had one of those. They had a lady who did that shit too, you know? So it's like yoga didn't do this to these people. Corruption, power did this to these people. And these people who moved in, they were just innocent bystanders. And you know what the crazy thing is too? These people were not stupid who lived there. The actual statistic is 1 in 5 people who lived in Rajneeshpuram had a master's degree. The American average is 1 in 10. So this was a pretty highly educated, at least standard American education requirements. These people weren't stupid, you know? And so what I felt with the documentary was that, in a way, maybe they were trying to demonize yoga a little bit. Maybe they were trying to scare people a little bit of this idea that, look, man, you know, you might walk into a yoga studio and there might be a guy there who he's teaching you about peace and love, and he's like, if you find your center and your core, and maybe you do some crazy shit, you go do Kundalini yoga, and you have to get up and do this dynamic meditation where you go crazy and you scream and you force yourself to cry, and you yell at people, and you shake around, you jump around. There might even be a little, like what they say, violence, where some people slap each other or whatever, and that's like a therapy. I think that's crazy. I've never heard of that shit, but apparently that was what was going on in the ashram. But you might look at these innocent-looking meditation practices. You might walk in on a yoga class that I'm doing. I do some yoga classes, and the teachers sometimes are like, they're like, just start yelling, or shaking your body around violently or whatever. And people will look at that and be like, that's a sign of the devil right there. These people are evil. These people are going to murder people. Kundalini yoga is just you programming your mind to be evil. The first 20 minutes struck me really hard, because when they were showing what a lot of these people were doing in their practices, I've done a lot of that shit. I went to India and meditated for a week, and a lot of that stuff was in there. They didn't call it dynamic meditations. It was just, part of the practices. I don't know if there were names for it. They had very technical, spiritual Indian names, but dynamic meditation, whatever you want to call it, like, it really brings out a part of your subconscious that you don't know is there, and will change the way you see the world. It definitely did for me, but it didn't turn me into a fucking, it didn't make me think I would go join a cult someday. But at the same time, I will say this, I'm going kind of long here, and I'm going to end soon, but I will end with this, is that you have to differentiate the people who would go for this sort of thing from the people who are smart enough to know, okay? Because when you go into a yoga class or a meditation session, there's both sides, and everyone's gullible in their own way. And I see it. I saw it in my group in India. I see it when I go do yoga now. These spiritual teachings, yoga and meditation, it brings out a side of you that is love, that is peace, and some people are more prone to the extremes of it than others. When you start messing around with your subconscious, when you start going in and doing work to reprogram how your body will instinctually react to the world, I think it does open up a lot of susceptibility. It opens up a lot of vulnerability. A lot of people who go and join, an ashram or, follow a spiritual teacher have probably been through their own trauma and have lost faith in the standard medical system. If you're listening to this, there's a good chance you've also lost faith in the standard American medical system, the standard American diet, the sick care system. You've seen people around you get chronically ill. Maybe you're chronically ill, and not even with cancer, but with maybe diabetes or some gut issue, Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, or maybe you just deal with a constant barrage of inflammation. Maybe you have skin issues you can't get rid of. Maybe you're just always sick. You can't figure out why. You're weak. Whatever it is. People in America are dealing with more medical issues physically and mentally than anyone else in the world. And we have the most money and the most resources to fix all that shit, yet it just gets worse and worse and worse. So what do? You turn to spirituality. You turn to a leader who says, look, not even a leader, but a teacher, someone who says everything you've been taught, everything you've been programmed has led you to where you are now. And if you're unhappy with where you are now, then that just shows that all the teachings you were taught, they're all false and they're all bullshit. So people cling on to that more so than anything else. And in the end, it can absolutely wreck them. But at the same time, in most cases, it does more good than harm. People find a community, people find love, they find compassion, they find empathy, they find people around them who want to care for them, and they they eventually find that love within themselves. You find that sixth sense, that third eye, that part of you that's always recording things that you can't quite tap into, and then when you can finally tap into them, it changes your life, dude. You lose your anxiety, you lose your depression, you start feeling like you can get out of bed in the morning, whereas the previous years you couldn't get out of bed in the morning. You felt helpless. You were in an abusive relationship and you found the power to leave it. You were in a job you hated and you found the power to leave it. These are all things people manifest through things like meditation and yoga. And I don't know if this documentary really did a good job of delineating the two. I think really in the end, if I didn't know better, I would just maybe look at something like a spiritual teacher or even a yoga teacher and be like, you're full of shit, man. You want me to do this crazy down dogs? Oh, what's next? I got to sell my fucking house and come, dig ditches for you for 16 hours a day to make you rich, I don't think the documentary did a good job of disconnecting that A to B connection. And so if you watch the documentary, if you haven't watched it yet, watch it, but then you'll see what I'm talking about, and watch it with an open mind and know that in a way there is a little bit of propaganda going on. There might be a whole lot of propaganda. And let me say this, it's not against Netflix terms of service to not put propaganda on there. See the White Helmets documentary for more information on that. But I could go on and on about this, but really, let me know your thoughts. Let me know what I didn't talk about that you found interesting about this documentary. Shoot me a line on Instagram, tag me in a picture of this podcast playing in your phone, or hit me up on Twitter, Holistic A-Hole. Send me a message on Facebook, Holistic A-Hole, or shoot me an email, holistic.a.hole@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. And if you enjoyed the podcast and you want to see more and more and more, go on to iTunes, leave me a 5-star review. A nice little note of how much you love the podcast would be great too. And share this on your social medias with all your friends, your family, anyone you know who enjoys this sort of thing. Let them know about the Holistic A-Hole. I really am truly grateful you guys have stuck on, if you're still listening to the end, and keep listening for more. And I hope you have a great week wherever you are. Holistic A-Hole out.